Social Intelligence. Introduction. In the introduction of Social Intelligence, the New Science of Human Relationships, Daniel Goleman presents a compelling argument that human beings are fundamentally wired for social connection, and that our relationships shape not only our emotions but also our biology, brain development, and overall well-being. Building on his earlier work on emotional intelligence, Goleman shifts focus from the internal world of self-awareness and emotional regulation to the external world of interpersonal dynamics, where he introduces the concept of social intelligence, a set of abilities that enable us to successfully navigate the complex terrain of human relationships. He begins by exploring the notion that the brain is inherently social, equipped with specialized systems such as mirror neurons, which allow us to sense, reflect, and respond to the emotions of others almost instantaneously. This biological capacity for empathy and attunement underpins much of what he defines as social intelligence, and it demonstrates that our brains are not isolated organs of thought, but open systems constantly shaped by interactions with others. Goleman emphasizes that the quality of our social connections has a profound effect on both our mental and physical health, citing scientific studies showing that supportive relationships can boost immunity, regulate stress hormones, and even influence gene expression. Conversely, chronic social stress or toxic interactions can harm the body, weaken the immune system, and increase vulnerability to disease. He asserts that every encounter we have leaves a trace on the brain, either reinforcing neural circuits for trust, compassion, and understanding, or amplifying those for anxiety, defensiveness, and fear. What makes social intelligence particularly urgent in today's world, according to Goleman, is the growing complexity and speed of modern life, which often discourages the kind of deep, empathic engagement necessary for truly meaningful relationships. In workplaces, schools, and even families, we are seeing a breakdown in the quality of human connection, despite the explosion of digital communication, because genuine social intelligence requires presence, empathy, and nuanced emotional exchange that cannot be replicated by text messages or screens. Goleman outlines that social intelligence consists of two broad categories: social awareness, the ability to sense and understand others' emotions and perspectives, and social facility, the ability to manage interactions skillfully, from listening and influence to conflict resolution and teamwork. The introduction sets the stage for the rest of the book by explaining how these skills are grounded in neuroscience and how they can be developed through conscious effort and practice. He also points to the implications of social intelligence in various realms of life, including leadership, parenting, education, and health, suggesting that fostering these abilities can lead not only to personal success but also to stronger communities and institutions. Throughout the introduction, Goleman maintains a balance between scientific rigor and accessible storytelling, illustrating his points with engaging anecdotes and case studies that show how real-life relationships play out in the brain and body. He references emerging research from neurobiology, psychology, and behavioral science to build his case that human connection is a basic need, as vital as food or shelter. He touches on the concept of emotional contagion, where people unconsciously mimic the emotions and behaviors of those around them, which means that moods and attitudes are not just personal, they are socially transmitted, creating feedback loops that can uplift or harm groups and individuals alike. This finding has far-reaching implications for how we think about leadership, education, healthcare, and social systems, where the emotional tone set by one person can influence the collective behavior of many. Furthermore, Goleman hints at the dangers of a lack of social intelligence in institutions that prioritize efficiency or technical skill over empathy and cooperation, suggesting that a narrow focus on individual performance often misses the larger picture of how relationships drive outcomes. He closes the introduction by asserting that cultivating social intelligence is not just a personal benefit, it is a social responsibility. As humans, our minds are interdependent, and the more we understand and respect that interconnection, the more we can create environments where people thrive emotionally, physically, and intellectually. This shift in focus, from IQ and individual traits to relational intelligence, reflects a growing understanding in science and society that connection is at the heart of human nature, and that by improving the quality of our relationships, we ultimately improve the quality of our lives. Thus, the introduction not only defines social intelligence as a concept but also positions it as a transformative framework for rethinking how we relate to others, and why doing so may be one of the most important steps we can take toward a more compassionate, cooperative, and healthy society. Chapter 1: Wired to Connect. Daniel Goleman lays the foundational premise of social intelligence, that human beings are biologically designed for social interaction, and our brains are literally wired to connect with others in ways that shape our emotions, behavior, and even our physical health. Drawing upon the latest findings in neuroscience and psychology, Goleman introduces the concept of the social brain, emphasizing that the human brain is not a solitary organ operating in isolation but a deeply relational system that constantly responds to the social environment. He explains how specific neural mechanisms, such as mirror neurons, enable us to empathize with others by internally simulating their feelings and actions. These neurons fire not only when we perform an action but also when we observe someone else doing the same thing, which allows us to intuitively grasp others' intentions, emotions, and mental states. This biological mimicry or emotional resonance forms the bedrock of empathy and social understanding, enabling us to connect emotionally and mentally with others almost instantaneously. Goleman discusses how this mirroring creates a shared experience between people, a kind of neural synchrony that fosters rapport, trust, and mutual understanding, core aspects of what he calls social intelligence. He further explains how face-to-face interactions trigger emotional exchanges that occur faster than conscious awareness, often in fractions of a second, and how subtle cues such as facial expressions, voice tone, body language, and eye contact communicate emotional states in ways that words alone cannot. Our ability to read and respond to these cues is part of an ancient survival mechanism, rooted in the evolution of mammals, particularly humans, whose complex social structures depend on cooperation and mutual care. The chapter dives into how our autonomic nervous system, particularly the vagus nerve, plays a central role in regulating emotional connection. Goleman references Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory to show how this system helps us assess the safety or threat of a social interaction in milliseconds, guiding whether we open emotionally or shut down in defense. In healthy interactions, the vagus nerve supports a calm, connected state that enhances communication and relational warmth. When we perceive danger or hostility, it shifts us into defensive modes such as fight, flight, or freeze, thus limiting our social responsiveness. Goleman uses this to emphasize that our biology is not neutral. Rather, it is continually shaped and reshaped by our interactions with others. He presents compelling scientific studies showing that positive social encounters activate brain circuits associated with pleasure and reward, such as the orbitofrontal cortex, while negative or threatening social experiences can light up areas linked to pain and fear, like the amygdala. The brain treats social rejection or criticism similarly to physical pain, reinforcing the idea that social connection is not a luxury but a biological necessity. He notes that the brain's plasticity allows it to be molded over time by the quality of our relationships. Kindness and empathy strengthen neural pathways for compassion, while chronic conflict or neglect can strengthen circuits associated with anxiety and mistrust. This understanding shifts the traditional view of intelligence away from purely cognitive measures like IQ to a more relational model in which social abilities are equally, if not more, essential for success and well-being. Goleman argues that because we are wired to connect, we are also wired to be influenced by others, emotionally, neurologically, and physiologically. He introduces the term emotional contagion to describe how moods can spread from person to person, often unconsciously, creating group dynamics that can be either toxic or uplifting. Leaders, teachers, and parents, by virtue of their roles, become powerful emotional influencers whose states of mind can resonate across entire groups. This explains why some teams flourish under positive, emotionally attuned leadership, while others suffer under negative or indifferent supervision. Importantly, Goleman cautions that our social wiring can also make us vulnerable to emotional manipulation, particularly in environments where fear or aggression dominate. He hints at the darker aspects of social influence, such as groupthink, prejudice, or mob behavior, where our need to connect and conform can override rational judgment. The chapter concludes by reinforcing the idea that our need for connection is as vital as food or shelter, not just metaphorically but biologically. From infancy to old age, our brains thrive on social stimulation and wither in its absence. Infants deprived of emotional bonding can show stunted brain development. Adults suffering prolonged loneliness have elevated risks of depression, cardiovascular problems, and even premature death. Goleman makes the case that understanding the science of human connection is essential in a world where relationships are increasingly mediated by technology, which often strips away the emotional richness of face-to-face interaction. He calls for a renewed emphasis on cultivating social intelligence in schools, workplaces, and communities, not only for individual well-being but also for societal resilience. In essence, Chapter 1 serves as a scientific and philosophical argument that to be human is to be connected, and that our very biology confirms this truth at the deepest levels. It is not enough to think or feel. To flourish, we must also relate, bond, and emotionally resonate with others. This chapter thus sets the tone for the rest of the book, establishing that the human capacity for empathy, trust, and emotional attunement is not just a soft skill, it is a hardwired necessity for survival, growth, and thriving in a complex social world. Chapter 2: A Recipe for Rapport. Daniel Goleman explores the mechanisms and components that create genuine interpersonal harmony, unpacking the subtle yet powerful dynamics behind the feeling of clicking with someone. He explains that rapport is not merely a pleasant social experience but a deep biological alignment between two individuals that arises when their emotional states, nonverbal cues, and nervous systems sync in real time. This synchrony, Goleman emphasizes, is not accidental. It results from the interplay of attentiveness, empathy, and emotional resonance. He identifies 3 key ingredients that must be present for rapport to develop: full mutual attention, nonverbal synchrony, and a shared positive emotional experience. Each of these elements involves specific neurological and physiological responses that prepare our brains and bodies to engage with another person meaningfully. Full attention means being completely present, free from distractions, and genuinely tuned into the other person's emotional signals, a rarity in the multitasking, digitally distracted modern world. Goleman explains that the quality of attention matters more than the quantity. People can sense when attention is divided or superficial, and this undermines trust and connection. He draws from neuroscience to show how eye contact, facial expressions, and even minute changes in voice tone are all processed by the brain as cues to emotional presence. When we are fully present, our brain's social circuits, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, become activated, allowing us to read emotional signals and adjust our responses in real time. This leads to nonverbal synchrony, the second element, where our bodies and expressions unconsciously begin to mirror those of the person we're interacting with. Goleman cites research on interactional synchrony, showing that when two people are in rapport, their gestures, postures, and even heart rates begin to align. This mirroring is often unconscious but plays a huge role in building trust, empathy, and a sense of being understood. He discusses how this process is rooted in the mirror neuron system, which enables us to simulate another person's experience internally. When we smile at someone and they smile back, it's not just politeness. It's a biological event that activates reward circuits in both brains, releasing feel-good chemicals like dopamine and oxytocin that reinforce connection. The third key element, shared positive emotions, acts as the emotional glue that strengthens and sustains rapport. Positive affect fosters openness, warmth, and a willingness to engage, while negative emotions tend to close us off or put us on the defensive. Goleman illustrates this through examples of conversations that start awkwardly but shift when laughter or mutual enthusiasm emerges, changing the emotional tone and deepening the connection. He emphasizes that rapport doesn't necessarily require agreement on every issue. Rather, it depends on emotional alignment and mutual respect. Even in disagreement, if both parties remain attuned to each other's emotions and engaged with empathy, rapport can be preserved or even strengthened. Goleman goes on to contrast genuine rapport with its absence, showing how misalignment, such as one person being disengaged, defensive, or emotionally flat, can derail a conversation. This breakdown often results from what he calls a neural veto, where fear or anxiety activates the amygdala, overriding the prefrontal cortex's capacity for empathy and connection. In such moments, people may retreat emotionally, misunderstand each other, or respond with hostility, creating a feedback loop that damages trust. To avoid this, Goleman stresses the importance of emotional self-awareness and emotional regulation, which allow individuals to stay emotionally grounded and responsive even in tense situations. He connects this to the broader theme of social intelligence, arguing that people who are skilled at creating rapport tend to be more successful in both personal and professional settings. Their ability to make others feel heard, valued, and emotionally safe gives them a social edge that enhances collaboration, leadership, and influence. Goleman also discusses cultural variations in rapport building, noting that norms around eye contact, touch, and expressive behavior vary globally, and that being socially intelligent includes being sensitive to these differences. He points out that while the underlying biology of rapport is universal, the social rules that govern its expression are culturally shaped. For instance, in some cultures direct eye contact may be seen as respectful and engaging, while in others it may be considered aggressive or rude. Thus, the socially intelligent individual is not only attuned to emotional cues but also adaptable to context. The chapter also explores how rapport is critical in institutional settings, such as schools, workplaces, and healthcare, where the quality of interaction can influence outcomes significantly. In classrooms, for example, students who feel rapport with their teachers are more engaged and perform better academically. In healthcare, patients are more likely to trust and adhere to treatment plans when they feel their doctors are genuinely attuned to their emotional and physical concerns. Goleman cites studies demonstrating that even brief moments of rapport, like a warm greeting or a shared laugh, can have disproportionate positive effects, underscoring how powerful and efficient rapport building can be when used wisely. He warns, however, that rapport can also be misused by manipulative individuals, salespeople, politicians, or sociopaths, who consciously mimic these techniques without authentic empathy, in order to influence or deceive. Thus, Goleman argues, true rapport is grounded in sincerity and mutual respect, not tactics or performance. He concludes the chapter by reflecting on how cultivating the capacity for rapport can transform not just individual relationships but the fabric of society. In a world increasingly dominated by digital communication, where face-to-face interaction is becoming rare, the ability to engage deeply and meaningfully with others is both a vital human need and a fading art. Goleman calls for a renewed focus on teaching social and emotional skills from an early age, so that future generations are better equipped to build strong, empathetic, and resilient relationships. He suggests that even small acts of attunement, like maintaining eye contact, offering a genuine smile, or listening without interruption, can have a ripple effect, fostering a culture of emotional connection and social health. Ultimately, a recipe for rapport frames rapport not just as a personal skill but as a social force, capable of healing divisions, strengthening communities, and enriching the human experience through the simple but profound act of emotionally connecting with others. Chapter 3: Neural Ballet. Daniel Goleman delves deeper into the intricate, moment-to-moment coordination of brain activity that occurs during social interactions, painting a vivid picture of how two human brains engage in an elaborate, real-time dance of emotional and neurological synchronization. He describes this process as a neural ballet, a metaphor for the subtle, dynamic interplay of nonverbal cues, emotions, and biological responses that unfold almost automatically whenever people engage with each other. This choreography of connection is largely unconscious yet immensely powerful, shaping how people feel, think, and respond in the presence of others. Goleman explains that the human brain is exquisitely sensitive to social signals, with specialized neural systems, like mirror neurons, the social cognition network, and the limbic system, that detect and decode facial expressions, body language, voice tone, and micro-expressions with incredible speed. These systems allow one person to track another's emotions as if on emotional radar, rapidly generating intuitive understanding without the need for words. As one person expresses a feeling, the observer's brain mimics or simulates that emotional state, activating similar neural pathways. This is emotional resonance, the core mechanism of empathy. Goleman emphasizes how automatic this mirroring is, and how it helps people to emotionally align, building rapport, trust, and understanding even before conscious thought arises. He notes that this synchrony is essential for smooth social interactions. It is what allows two people to finish each other's sentences, read between the lines, or simply feel each other's moods with little effort. These neural exchanges happen in a matter of milliseconds and are mediated through key brain structures like the amygdala, which scans for emotional significance and threat, and the orbitofrontal cortex, which integrates emotional information and guides social behavior. He explains that when people are emotionally attuned, their physiological states also start to align. Heart rate, breathing patterns, and hormone levels begin to coordinate, a phenomenon known as physiological synchrony. This doesn't just promote connection, it boosts emotional regulation and well-being. Goleman discusses how the neural ballet is most refined in secure, emotionally supportive relationships, where both people are emotionally present, open, and responsive. He cites studies of infant caregiver bonding, where a baby's developing brain is shaped by the caregiver's facial expressions, voice tone, and touch. These early interactions set the template for how the child will connect with others throughout life, suggesting that the neural ballet begins in infancy and continues throughout the lifespan. At the same time, Goleman acknowledges that this system is highly sensitive and easily disrupted. When one person becomes emotionally detached, hostile, or anxious, the synchrony breaks down, and both people's brains register the discord as stress or threat. The amygdala becomes hyperactive, releasing stress hormones like cortisol and shutting down the prefrontal regions responsible for empathy, insight, and reflective thought. This creates a kind of emotional dissonance. Conversations feel awkward, forced, or aggressive, and people may misread cues or overreact to perceived slights. Goleman calls this the low road of emotional response, a fast, automatic pathway that bypasses rational thinking and can hijack interactions, especially under stress. In contrast, when the high road, the slower, more deliberate neural path involving the prefrontal cortex, is engaged, people are able to reflect, regulate emotion, and respond thoughtfully. The neural ballet thus involves a constant balancing act between these pathways, where attention, self-awareness, and emotional regulation determine whether interactions deepen rapport or devolve into misunderstanding. Goleman also emphasizes the role of attention as a control switch in this ballet. When someone is fully attentive, their brain aligns more closely with the others, enhancing neural resonance. In contrast, when distracted or preoccupied, especially by devices or internal worries, this alignment falters, reducing the quality of the interaction. He links this to modern life, warning that the constant barrage of stimuli, multitasking, and screen time may erode our ability to engage in real-time, emotionally rich neural ballet, especially in young people who are still developing social circuitry. The chapter also discusses how this dance differs in individuals with social difficulties, such as those on the autism spectrum or with social anxiety, whose neural systems may process social cues differently, limiting their capacity for spontaneous emotional synchrony. While not judging these differences, Goleman uses them to illustrate how delicate and complex the neural ballet is, and how much it depends on both innate wiring and life experience. He points out that while some people are naturally more socially attuned, these abilities can be nurtured and improved with practice, empathy, and mindful attention to others. This opens the door for social intelligence to be seen not just as a fixed trait, but as a trainable skill set rooted in biology. Importantly, Goleman weaves in the implications of this science for various spheres of life. In romantic relationships, friendships, therapy, education, and leadership, those who can engage in this neural ballet with grace and consistency tend to foster trust, cooperation, and emotional safety. He gives examples of couples whose emotional synchrony fosters deep intimacy, and leaders who, by emotionally resonating with their teams, build loyalty and morale. He contrasts this with dysfunctional dynamics, where constant emotional misattunement leads to conflict, burnout, or emotional withdrawal. These examples underscore his argument that the quality of our relationships, and by extension much of our happiness and health, depends on how well we navigate the subtle neural dance of daily interactions. He concludes the chapter with a powerful assertion, that every encounter we have is a shared biological event, shaping not only our immediate emotional experience but also sculpting our brain's social circuits over time. The more we engage in positive, attuned interactions, the stronger our capacity for empathy, understanding, and emotional intelligence becomes. Conversely, repeated exposure to emotionally disconnected or hostile exchanges weakens our social attunement and increases stress. Goleman thus frames the neural ballet not just as a scientific curiosity but as the very foundation of human connection, emotional well-being, and societal harmony, a deeply human art form written into our biology, yet increasingly at risk in the distracted, hurried modern world. Chapter 4: Love and Attachment. Daniel Goleman explores the profound biological and emotional foundations of human bonding, particularly the unique emotional circuitry that governs our capacity to love, attach, and maintain intimate connections across the lifespan. He begins by examining how the most powerful human bond, love, is not merely a feeling but a deeply wired neurobiological process, shaped by early experiences and sustained through a complex interplay of hormones, brain structures, and emotional learning. Drawing from attachment theory and neuroscience, Goleman explains that our earliest emotional experiences, especially with primary caregivers, form internal working models of love and attachment that shape how we relate to others for the rest of our lives. These early interactions create expectations about whether others will be available, trustworthy, and responsive, or not. He discusses how secure attachments, where caregivers are emotionally attuned and consistent, allow children to develop a stable sense of self, emotional regulation, and the confidence to explore the world. In contrast, insecure attachments, whether anxious, avoidant, or disorganized, can lead to patterns of emotional dependence, withdrawal, or instability in adult relationships. Goleman then connects this psychological theory to hard neuroscience, showing how the neural mechanisms that support attachment are found in the limbic system, particularly the amygdala and orbitofrontal cortex, which together form the emotional brain. He explains how these systems learn through repeated emotional experiences, wiring us for either secure emotional engagement or defensive relational styles. Importantly, the orbitofrontal cortex, which matures in close interaction with loving caregivers, plays a critical role in interpreting others' emotions and adjusting our behavior accordingly. It helps us gauge how to respond in emotionally charged moments, making it key to empathy, trust, and relational harmony. Goleman introduces the hormone oxytocin, often called the love hormone, as a key player in attachment. Released during bonding activities like hugging, touching, breastfeeding, and sexual intimacy, oxytocin fosters trust, emotional closeness, and a sense of safety. Its effects are not just emotional but physiological, lowering stress responses and promoting a calm, connected state that strengthens the bond between people. He also discusses vasopressin, a related hormone that supports pair bonding, especially in males, and has been shown in animal studies to promote monogamy and protectiveness. These chemicals, along with dopamine and endorphins, create the neurochemical cocktail that makes love feel so rewarding and emotionally anchoring. Goleman explains that while the biological basis for love is universal, the way it is expressed and experienced is shaped by individual attachment histories and emotional learning. For example, someone with a secure attachment style may feel comfortable with closeness and trust, while someone with an avoidant history may become uncomfortable with intimacy, even when oxytocin is released. He illustrates this with case studies and research on couples, showing how people often unconsciously reenact the emotional patterns they learned in childhood, even if those patterns are dysfunctional. This is why some people repeatedly choose emotionally unavailable partners or react to closeness with fear or withdrawal. It's not conscious choice but ingrained neural programming. However, Goleman emphasizes that the brain's plasticity allows for change. With sustained emotional support, therapy, or new positive relationships, people can rewire their emotional habits and form healthier bonds. The chapter also explores the unique properties of romantic love, especially in its early stages, when passion and infatuation are driven by surges in dopamine and the brain's reward system. These early experiences often feel intoxicating because they activate the same circuits as addictive substances, creating a euphoric sense of longing, pleasure, and obsession. But Goleman warns that this phase, while exhilarating, is not the same as mature attachment. True emotional bonding develops over time through consistent emotional presence, mutual support, and the development of trust. He contrasts passion-based relationships with companionate love, which is more stable, emotionally nurturing, and deeply rooted in mutual attunement, what he calls limbic resonance and regulation. Limbic resonance occurs when two people's emotional brains sync up, creating shared moods and states of calm or excitement. Over time, this resonance builds a kind of emotional muscle memory, where simply being near a loved one regulates stress, promotes well-being, and provides a secure emotional base. He shows that in loving relationships, partners actually help regulate each other's nervous systems, what psychologists call co-regulation, which explains why we often feel soothed by a partner's presence or distressed by their absence. This also ties into the broader health benefits of secure attachment. People in loving, emotionally attuned relationships tend to have lower levels of stress hormones like cortisol, stronger immune systems, better cardiovascular health, and even longer lifespans. Goleman explains that chronic loneliness or relationship conflict, by contrast, can dysregulate the limbic system, keeping the body in a prolonged state of stress that contributes to physical and emotional illness. He explores how love and attachment extend beyond romantic relationships to friendships, family bonds, and even therapeutic relationships, all of which can activate the same attachment circuitry and offer emotional healing. He presents evidence that therapeutic relationships work not only because of insight or advice, but because the therapist provides a stable, attuned emotional presence that allows the client's brain to experience a healthier form of attachment, often for the first time. Goleman also addresses the risks of emotional dependency and codependency, where love becomes entangled with unresolved trauma, fear, or insecurity. He argues that healthy attachment is not about fusion or neediness but about emotional attunement, boundaries, and mutual regulation. He encourages cultivating what he calls emotional wisdom in love, the ability to stay emotionally present and empathic even in the face of conflict, misunderstanding, or vulnerability. Love, in this view, is both a skill and a state, a dynamic interaction of brains, hearts, and habits that, when nurtured, offers the deepest human fulfillment. Goleman closes the chapter by emphasizing that love and attachment are not sentimental luxuries but central to our survival and thriving. They are biologically imperative, shaping who we are, how we relate, and how we heal. In a world where relationships are often strained by stress, trauma, or digital disconnection, he calls for a deeper appreciation of the science of love, not just as romance, but as the core mechanism by which human beings flourish. Chapter 5: The Chemistry of Connection. Daniel Goleman explores the profound ways in which human connection is deeply rooted in our biology, governed by an intricate interplay of neurochemicals that shape not only how we feel during social interactions but also how we behave and relate to others over time. He opens the chapter by emphasizing that social connection is not a luxury but a biological necessity, hardwired into our nervous systems through evolution to promote bonding, cooperation, and survival. Goleman explains that every time we engage with another person, whether through a warm hug, empathetic conversation, or shared laughter, our brain releases a cocktail of chemicals that influence our mood, stress levels, trust, and emotional well-being. Chief among these are oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, endorphins, and cortisol, each playing a unique role in the emotional chemistry of connection. Oxytocin, sometimes called the bonding hormone or cuddle chemical, is released during moments of physical touch, emotional closeness, or trust, and it fosters feelings of warmth, attachment, and safety. Goleman highlights how oxytocin reduces fear and anxiety by calming the amygdala, the brain's threat detector, thereby enhancing our openness to others. This makes oxytocin central to social bonding, from mother-infant attachment to romantic intimacy to the quiet feeling of comfort between close friends. At the same time, dopamine, the brain's reward chemical, is released during pleasurable interactions, reinforcing behaviors that bring connection and emotional gratification. This is why positive social exchanges can feel energizing and even addictive. Our brains are literally rewarding us for connecting. Serotonin, meanwhile, is linked to feelings of well-being, social status, and belonging, and when it's elevated through positive social interactions, it promotes confidence, contentment, and cooperation. In contrast, Goleman explores how cortisol, the stress hormone, floods the body during negative social interactions, such as conflict, rejection, or isolation, and creates physical and emotional strain. Chronic exposure to social stress can lead to anxiety, depression, weakened immune function, and other health problems, underscoring how our social environments directly shape our physiology. Goleman illustrates these principles through research in neuroscience and behavioral studies, showing how warm, supportive relationships lower cortisol levels and activate pathways that improve emotional regulation, while toxic or emotionally cold environments have the opposite effect. He introduces the concept of social baseline theory, which suggests that our brains assume the presence of supportive others as a baseline for safety and efficiency, so much so that simply having a trusted person nearby reduces the brain's perception of threat and the metabolic cost of dealing with stress. This is why we feel stronger and more resilient when supported by others, and more vulnerable and exhausted when alone under pressure. Goleman discusses how these biological systems are especially sensitive during key developmental periods, such as early childhood and adolescence, when the brain is still forming its social and emotional circuitry. Children raised in nurturing, emotionally responsive environments develop stronger neural connections for empathy, trust, and self-regulation, while those exposed to neglect, abuse, or chronic stress often develop overactive stress responses and impaired social cognition. These early patterns can carry into adulthood, influencing how we relate to others and whether we feel safe in closeness. However, because the brain is plastic, capable of change throughout life, he emphasizes that even long-standing emotional patterns can be reshaped through new, emotionally nourishing relationships or therapeutic interventions. Goleman dives into the science of limbic regulation, the way our nervous systems adjust and align with those around us, creating shared emotional states. He explains that in healthy relationships, people act as emotional regulators for one another, helping each other calm down, feel validated, or become energized. This regulatory process is visible in the synchrony of heart rate, breathing, and hormonal levels between people who are emotionally attuned, such as between a parent and child, a couple in love, or even a therapist and client. These connections build emotional resilience and promote healing, while a lack of attunement leads to miscommunication, stress, and disconnection. Goleman uses examples from psychotherapy, showing how the therapeutic alliance functions as a source of limbic healing, with the therapist's calm, steady emotional presence gradually reshaping the client's stress responses and internal working models of relationships. He also discusses how emotional contagion, the tendency to catch the emotions of those around us, is mediated by mirror neurons and subcortical brain regions, allowing moods and emotional states to spread quickly through groups, for better or worse. This has profound implications for leadership, family dynamics, and workplace culture. A stressed or angry individual can infect an entire team with negativity, while a calm, positive presence can elevate collective morale. Goleman introduces the idea of emotional ecosystems, where the emotional chemistry of individuals continuously influences and is influenced by the social group, creating reinforcing cycles of either support and well-being or conflict and dysfunction. This feedback loop highlights the ethical and emotional responsibility we have in our interactions, to be conscious of the chemical and emotional impact we have on others and to cultivate emotional intelligence as a means of creating healthier environments. He ties this idea to emotional intelligence competencies like empathy, self-awareness, and relationship management, arguing that mastering these skills allows us to intentionally shape the chemistry of our relationships in positive ways. Importantly, Goleman addresses how modern life, with its increasing digital mediation, isolation, and fast-paced stressors, can disrupt the natural chemistry of connection. Screen-based interactions often lack the sensory cues that trigger oxytocin and serotonin, leaving people more prone to loneliness, miscommunication, and emotional dysregulation. He warns that despite the illusion of connectivity, many people are suffering from what he calls connection starvation, where the brain and body miss out on the beneficial neurochemistry of real human presence. To counter this, Goleman advocates for intentional practices that foster authentic connection: active listening, physical touch, eye contact, shared experiences, and quality time. He also points to the importance of emotional hygiene, being mindful of how we influence others emotionally and taking care of our own stress levels so we don't spread toxicity unconsciously. The chapter concludes with a powerful reminder that while human beings are capable of extraordinary cognitive feats, our deepest and most essential capacities, trust, empathy, love, and healing, are rooted in the ancient chemical language of our bodies. To thrive individually and collectively, we must honor and nurture the chemistry of connection that evolution has so carefully wired into our social brains. Chapter 6: Broken Bonds. Daniel Goleman explores the deeply distressing and biologically impactful consequences of disrupted social connections, focusing on how emotional disconnection, neglect, rejection, and betrayal can leave lasting scars not only on our psyche but also on the structure and chemistry of our brains. He begins by reinforcing the idea that human beings are wired to connect and that relationships, particularly those that involve trust, safety, and mutual attunement, are as essential to our well-being as food and shelter. When those connections are ruptured, especially in early life or in significant relationships, the emotional and physiological fallout can be profound. Goleman introduces the neuroscience behind emotional pain, explaining that the brain interprets social pain, such as being rejected, ignored, or shamed, through the same neural pathways as physical pain, particularly in the anterior cingulate cortex. This overlap helps explain why a broken heart can feel quite literally painful and why social exclusion or emotional abandonment can trigger intense distress responses. He draws on studies showing that people who are ostracized or chronically ignored exhibit higher levels of stress hormones like cortisol and show increased activity in brain regions linked to threat detection, such as the amygdala. These reactions are not simply metaphorical or psychological. They are rooted in a biological alarm system designed to alert us to social danger, which in evolutionary terms could mean expulsion from the group and, ultimately, death. Goleman emphasizes that broken bonds are particularly damaging in childhood, where the developing brain is highly sensitive to relational input. He explores the long-term impact of childhood trauma, neglect, or inconsistent caregiving, showing how such experiences can impair the development of the orbitofrontal cortex and limbic structures involved in emotional regulation, empathy, and interpersonal trust. Children who grow up without secure attachments often become hypervigilant to social threat, misread emotional cues, or develop emotional numbness and difficulty forming healthy adult relationships. Goleman cites research on attachment disorders, developmental trauma, and emotional neglect to underscore how these early ruptures shape the emotional architecture of the brain and can create enduring patterns of mistrust, avoidance, or emotional volatility. He also notes that such emotional wounds are not necessarily visible, making them harder to detect and treat than overt physical injuries, but they are just as real, and often more enduring. In adult life, the breakdown of important emotional bonds, through betrayal, divorce, estrangement, or loss, can reactivate those same neural pathways of pain and insecurity. Goleman explores the emotional physiology of breakups and betrayal, noting how they trigger stress responses that impair our ability to think clearly, regulate emotion, or connect with others. The more intimate and emotionally significant the relationship, the deeper the neural impact of its rupture. For example, the end of a romantic relationship doesn't just bring sadness. It activates brain regions linked to addiction withdrawal, reflecting how emotionally bonded relationships form deep chemical imprints through oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin pathways. When those bonds are severed, the brain experiences a kind of social withdrawal that can mimic drug cravings, depression, or emotional disorientation. Goleman argues that unresolved emotional trauma from broken bonds can lead to a pattern of emotional defensiveness, where individuals shut down their capacity for vulnerability to avoid being hurt again. This can manifest as cynicism, emotional detachment, or even aggression, forming what he calls a limbic armor that protects the heart at the cost of intimacy. He illustrates this with clinical examples of individuals who, after being betrayed or abandoned, become emotionally frozen, unable to trust or connect deeply with others. Yet Goleman is careful not to present this as a permanent state. He stresses the brain's capacity for healing and the role of emotionally reparative experiences in restoring broken bonds. He introduces the concept of limbic healing, where a consistent, emotionally attuned relationship, whether with a friend, partner, therapist, or even a pet, can help rewire the brain's emotional circuitry, easing the effects of past ruptures and allowing for renewed trust and connection. Through emotionally safe relationships, people can learn to re-engage their social brains, lower their stress responses, and re-establish emotional resonance. He emphasizes the importance of emotional presence, empathy, and sustained care in this healing process, noting that quick fixes or superficial reassurances are rarely enough to repair deep emotional injuries. Goleman also explores the broader social implications of broken bonds, particularly how communities, organizations, and even societies can suffer when trust and emotional connection break down. He discusses how institutional betrayal, such as abuse by religious or governmental authorities, systemic injustice, or cultural alienation, can lead to collective trauma and widespread mistrust. This communal limbic distress can perpetuate cycles of fear, anger, and disconnection that echo across generations. He draws connections to issues like racism, poverty, and war, arguing that chronic exposure to relational trauma and social exclusion creates not only personal pain but structural dysfunction. He stresses that healing broken bonds is not only a personal task but a social imperative that requires compassion, justice, and inclusive practices that restore dignity and connection at every level of human interaction. In more everyday terms, Goleman urges readers to pay attention to the micro-ruptures in their own relationships, moments of emotional disconnection, misattunement, or dismissal, and to make intentional efforts to repair them before they calcify into lasting fractures. He emphasizes that repair is possible through apology, empathy, emotional honesty, and the willingness to listen and be vulnerable. These small acts of repair, when practiced consistently, help keep the social brain regulated and relational circuits open. As with many themes in social intelligence, Goleman's message in this chapter is ultimately hopeful. Though the bonds that sustain us may be fragile and easily broken, they are also resilient and capable of being mended. The same neural systems that encode pain and fear are also capable of registering safety and love. By understanding the deep biological consequences of broken bonds, and the equally powerful potential for healing through reconnection, individuals and communities can begin to prioritize the emotional wisdom needed to foster genuine, lasting human connection. He ends the chapter with a call to recognize emotional rupture not as weakness but as a biological signal for healing, reminding us that our greatest source of suffering and our deepest capacity for joy both arise from the same place, the relational heart of the human brain. Chapter 7: The Dark Triad. Daniel Goleman delves into the disturbing territory of antisocial personalities and the darker aspects of social intelligence, examining how certain individuals are exceptionally skilled at manipulating others, not in the service of empathy or connection, but for control, dominance, or exploitation. The chapter centers around three interrelated personality traits: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, collectively known as the dark triad, a term used in psychology to describe people whose social behaviors are cold, self-serving, and often harmful, yet cloaked in charm and strategic intelligence. Goleman begins by describing how these individuals can thrive in social environments because they possess high cognitive social intelligence. They can read people's emotions, motivations, and vulnerabilities with remarkable accuracy. However, what they lack is empathic or emotional social intelligence, the capacity to care about others' feelings, to feel guilt, or to form genuine emotional bonds. In essence, they are socially savvy without being emotionally ethical. He describes narcissists as people who crave admiration and validation, often with an inflated sense of self-importance and entitlement. They manipulate others to feed their ego and become enraged or vindictive when their image is threatened. Machiavellians, on the other hand, are strategic, calculating, and deceitful, treating relationships purely as tools for personal gain. They are excellent at playing social games but remain emotionally detached. Psychopaths, the most dangerous of the three, lack conscience altogether, exhibiting a chilling disregard for the emotions, rights, and well-being of others. They are often charismatic and superficially charming but are capable of deceit, aggression, and cruelty without remorse. Goleman illustrates how individuals exhibiting these traits can rise to positions of power, whether in business, politics, or personal relationships, because their charm and manipulation skills allow them to gain trust quickly and exploit social systems that reward dominance over empathy. He warns that many institutions, especially competitive or hierarchical ones, may inadvertently favor dark triad traits, mistaking confidence for competence or assertiveness for leadership. In such settings, these individuals can cause immense damage, undermining colleagues, sabotaging teams, exploiting trust, and spreading emotional harm, while maintaining a convincing facade. Goleman discusses how their victims often feel confused, self-doubting, and emotionally devastated, especially because the manipulation is often subtle, disguised as mentorship, friendship, or love. He describes tactics such as gaslighting, triangulation, and emotional invalidation, which leave targets questioning their own perception of reality. He also points out that victims may not be weak or naive. Dark triad individuals are simply skilled at preying on empathy, exploiting people's desire to connect or be understood. Goleman draws from psychological research, including the work of Robert Hare on psychopathy and Paul Babiek on corporate predators, to demonstrate how such personalities can infiltrate workplaces, abuse power, and evade accountability, often leaving trails of emotional or even financial destruction. Despite their harmful behavior, these individuals often go unnoticed because they know how to say the right things, mimic emotional responses, and use flattery or manipulation to charm their way through relationships. Goleman makes a critical distinction between emotional intelligence used for connection and emotional intelligence used for manipulation, a morally neutral set of skills that can be wielded for either good or ill depending on a person's values. He emphasizes that truly ethical emotional intelligence requires empathy, integrity, and compassion, without which social acumen can become a weapon. This chapter also sheds light on the neurological and developmental roots of the dark triad traits. Goleman notes that people with psychopathic tendencies often show reduced activity in the amygdala and prefrontal cortex, areas linked to empathy, fear, and impulse control. This means they may literally be biologically less capable of feeling fear or recognizing others' distress. Some of these traits may emerge due to genetics, early trauma, neglect, or an emotionally abusive environment where empathy was never modeled or rewarded. Goleman stresses, however, that not everyone with these traits is a full-blown psychopath. Rather, many people fall somewhere on a spectrum and may exhibit varying degrees of these characteristics depending on context, stress, or environment. Importantly, he notes that while empathy and conscience are deeply rooted in the brain, they can also be suppressed or overridden, especially in toxic cultures or environments that reward selfishness, competition, or emotional detachment. Goleman connects this to broader societal implications, arguing that the glorification of power, fame, and individualism may contribute to the rise of emotionally exploitative behavior. He warns of a cultural climate that fosters narcissism, through social media, celebrity culture, and competitive success metrics, and desensitizes people to the emotional harm inflicted by charismatic manipulators. To counteract this, he advocates for the cultivation of moral intelligence alongside social intelligence, encouraging education systems, workplaces, and leadership development programs to emphasize compassion, accountability, and ethical decision-making. He also explores strategies for recognizing and protecting oneself from people who embody the dark triad. He recommends learning to read behavioral patterns rather than just words, trusting one's gut when something feels emotionally manipulative or dishonest, and setting strong boundaries. Goleman highlights the importance of cultivating internal emotional clarity so that one is less susceptible to emotional hijacking or gaslighting. In cases where relationships with such individuals are unavoidable, as in workplaces or families, he advises emotional detachment, strategic communication, and support from emotionally healthy allies. He closes the chapter by emphasizing that the presence of dark triad individuals in our social environments is not just a personal issue, but a systemic one. When institutions ignore or enable such behavior, entire organizations and communities suffer, creating cultures of fear, mistrust, and emotional harm. Goleman calls for a deeper collective understanding of the emotional impact of manipulative personalities, not to stigmatize or demonize individuals, but to equip society with the awareness and resilience to protect emotional well-being. Ultimately, this chapter serves as a sobering reminder that social intelligence, when divorced from empathy and ethics, can be dangerous, and that the true power of emotional intelligence lies not just in understanding others, but in using that understanding to build connection, trust, and collective flourishing. Chapter 8: Healthy Relationships. Daniel Goleman shifts from the dangers of manipulative personalities to the deeply enriching and biologically nourishing power of emotionally attuned, supportive, and mutually respectful relationships, which he identifies as the foundation of individual well-being and social flourishing. He begins by emphasizing that healthy relationships are not just psychologically comforting, they are physiologically essential, shaping the architecture of our brains, regulating our emotional states, boosting immunity, and even extending our lifespan. These relationships act as emotional ecosystems that provide safety, attunement, and the kind of trust that allows us to let our guard down, relax our stress responses, and experience joy, learning, and growth. Goleman draws on neuroscience to explain how emotionally positive relationships stimulate the brain's reward circuits, especially through oxytocin, serotonin, and dopamine, reinforcing behaviors that enhance trust, empathy, and cooperation. He highlights the role of limbic resonance, a process through which two nervous systems become attuned, allowing people to experience shared emotional states that synchronize heart rate, facial expressions, voice tone, and even hormonal levels. In healthy relationships, this resonance creates a feedback loop of safety and connection, where people feel seen, heard, and emotionally nourished. He contrasts this with emotionally toxic relationships, where misattunement or emotional neglect activates the amygdala and stress pathways, leading to anxiety, defensiveness, and eventual disconnection. What distinguishes healthy relationships, according to Goleman, is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of emotional attunement, the ability to sense, respond to, and regulate each other's emotional needs with care and authenticity. Whether between romantic partners, friends, colleagues, or family members, emotionally intelligent relationships prioritize empathy, listening, vulnerability, and mutual influence. He explains that emotionally intelligent people are able to read nonverbal cues, offer validation without trying to fix the other person, and manage their own emotions during interpersonal tension so that they can remain constructive rather than reactive. Goleman draws from attachment theory to show that secure attachments, formed in childhood and reinforced in healthy adult bonds, create the emotional foundation for resilience, exploration, and intimacy. People in secure relationships are better able to navigate stress, maintain focus, and pursue goals, not because they are emotionally self-sufficient, but because they have internalized a sense of relational safety. He highlights that healthy relationships create an internal working model in which the brain expects empathy and cooperation from others, making it easier to engage in open communication and constructive conflict resolution. One of the key features of healthy relationships, Goleman notes, is emotional transparency, the willingness to share inner experiences and listen non-judgmentally in return. This openness fosters trust, and trust, in turn, deepens connection. In such environments, feedback is given with care, vulnerability is met with compassion, and differences are navigated with respect. Goleman also discusses the concept of interactive repair, the ability to notice and mend moments of disconnection, such as a misinterpreted comment or a failed bid for attention. In emotionally intelligent relationships, these ruptures are addressed quickly, usually through a simple but sincere apology, empathetic listening, or affectionate reassurance. Over time, the consistent practice of repair strengthens the relationship's emotional fabric and builds a sense of safety that can withstand stress and disagreement. Goleman emphasizes that this emotional maintenance is especially important in intimate and long-term relationships, where unresolved grievances and subtle emotional injuries can accumulate and erode trust if not attended to. He draws attention to the work of psychologist Daniel Goleman, who found that couples with a high ratio of positive to negative interactions, and the ability to repair emotional ruptures, are significantly more likely to sustain a happy and lasting relationship. Goleman also extends the concept of healthy relationships to the workplace, where emotional intelligence becomes a critical factor in team performance, leadership effectiveness, and organizational culture. He argues that emotionally intelligent leaders foster healthy professional relationships by modeling empathy, offering psychological safety, and facilitating honest, respectful communication. Such environments allow creativity and collaboration to thrive because people feel emotionally secure and valued. He points out that toxic leadership, marked by emotional volatility, favoritism, or manipulation, can spread emotional distress throughout a team, lowering morale and productivity, while emotionally intelligent leadership creates a climate of trust and resilience. Goleman notes that building healthy relationships requires ongoing self-awareness and emotional regulation, as well as the humility to admit when we've hurt someone and the courage to reach out and repair. He underscores the importance of emotional hygiene, a term he uses to describe the habits of checking in with our own emotional state, managing reactivity, and being intentional about the emotional tone we bring into interactions. People who take responsibility for their emotional presence tend to foster more stable, fulfilling relationships because they don't unconsciously project unprocessed emotions onto others or allow temporary moods to damage long-term bonds. Another cornerstone of healthy relationships, Goleman asserts, is mutual influence. The recognition that relationships should not be about control, dominance, or self-interest, but about co-creating a dynamic of care, respect, and flexibility. In healthy relationships, power is shared, and both individuals feel empowered to express their needs and preferences without fear. He observes that rigid roles, whether in gender norms, hierarchical positions, or cultural expectations, can stifle emotional responsiveness and lead to alienation unless consciously navigated with empathy and mutual respect. Goleman also considers the broader societal and cultural dimensions of relationship health, arguing that communities and institutions must foster relational values through education, media, and policy. He envisions a future where emotional intelligence is cultivated from childhood and reinforced throughout life, not as a soft skill, but as a core human competence essential to collective well-being. He stresses the need to model and teach relationship skills, such as active listening, emotional regulation, and empathy, at every level of society. In conclusion, Goleman returns to the biological core of his argument, that healthy relationships are not a luxury, but a necessity wired into the social brain. They soothe our stress, sharpen our minds, strengthen our immune systems, and give us the emotional fuel to face life's challenges with confidence. While toxic relationships can literally make us sick, emotionally nourishing ones heal us, inspire us, and connect us to our best selves. He reminds us that the quality of our relationships determines the quality of our lives, and that investing in emotional intelligence, both personally and collectively, is the most powerful way to build a healthier, more compassionate world. Chapter 9: Social Intelligence at Work. Daniel Goleman explores how the principles of social intelligence, empathy, attunement, influence, concern, and emotional regulation, play a crucial role in shaping the quality of workplace dynamics, leadership effectiveness, organizational culture, and overall productivity. He begins by challenging the traditional view of the workplace as a purely rational, transactional environment where emotions should be set aside in favor of efficiency and logic, arguing instead that emotions are not only ever present in professional settings but deeply influence decision-making, creativity, collaboration, and performance. Goleman highlights that every interaction between coworkers, supervisors, clients, and subordinates is a neural exchange, an emotional transaction that either energizes or depletes, builds trust or sows mistrust. Drawing from neuroscience, he explains that mirror neurons and limbic resonance allow us to pick up on others' emotional states in milliseconds, which means that the tone, body language, and emotional energy of a leader or colleague can spread through an organization like a contagion, for better or worse. A manager's irritability can spark anxiety in a team, just as a leader's calm confidence can inspire focus and morale. In essence, the emotional climate of a workplace is co-created in every interaction and heavily influenced by those in positions of authority. Goleman underscores the significance of emotional labor, the often invisible effort of managing one's emotions to align with organizational expectations, such as being upbeat with customers or tactful with a critical boss, which can be emotionally taxing if unsupported or inauthentic. He emphasizes that the ability to manage this emotional labor without burnout depends largely on the social intelligence of the organizational environment. For example, employees in emotionally toxic environments, where fear, blame, or manipulation prevail, often experience chronic stress, disengagement, and declining performance, which can lead to high turnover, absenteeism, and even physical illness due to sustained cortisol elevation and neural strain. In contrast, workplaces that promote psychological safety, where employees feel safe to express themselves without fear of ridicule or punishment, foster trust, innovation, and commitment. Goleman draws on real-world corporate examples, psychological research, and workplace case studies to show how leaders who embody emotional and social intelligence, who listen actively, give constructive feedback, express genuine concern for their teams, and model emotional regulation, can elevate not just individual performance but the entire workplace atmosphere. He introduces the concept of resonant leadership, which is based on the ability of leaders to create emotional resonance within teams by being attuned, authentic, and supportive. Resonant leaders foster engagement, creativity, and loyalty because they make people feel valued and emotionally secure. Goleman contrasts this with dissonant leadership, where leaders who are emotionally distant, reactive, or manipulative create environments of anxiety, fear, or detachment. These dissonant leaders may achieve short-term compliance through authority or intimidation but fail to sustain long-term success because they erode trust and morale. He illustrates this with examples from corporate life where emotionally intelligent leaders transformed underperforming teams through empathy and vision, while high IQ but emotionally tone-deaf executives derailed organizations despite technical brilliance. Importantly, Goleman asserts that social intelligence in the workplace is not a soft, peripheral skill. It's a core driver of measurable outcomes like employee retention, customer satisfaction, innovation, and profitability. Teams that feel emotionally supported and connected are more collaborative, more willing to take creative risks, and more resilient in the face of setbacks. In such environments, emotional energy is not drained by constant stress or conflict but is channeled into focus, cooperation, and problem-solving. Goleman also addresses the importance of organizational empathy, where companies align policies and practices with the emotional and social realities of their people. He argues that empathy at scale, through flexible work policies, inclusive cultures, and attentive management, translates into reputational strength and business sustainability. For instance, when employees feel that their personal lives, well-being, and values are respected, they invest more fully in their work and their teams. Goleman also notes that social intelligence is particularly important in diverse, global workplaces where cultural differences can lead to misunderstanding or unconscious bias. He encourages cross-cultural empathy and curiosity, urging leaders to recognize and respect differences in communication styles, emotional expression, and social norms. Building an emotionally intelligent workplace, he says, requires training, feedback, and a conscious shift away from outdated command and control models of leadership toward collaborative, emotionally aware management styles. He emphasizes that social intelligence is not fixed. People can develop it through coaching, mindfulness, reflective practice, and emotional feedback. Goleman highlights the importance of emotional self-awareness in the workplace, knowing one's own triggers, blind spots, and habitual emotional patterns, because without self-understanding one cannot manage reactions or relate authentically to others. He also advocates for empathetic listening, where the goal is not to respond quickly or assert one's view, but to understand the speaker's underlying emotion and intent. When practiced consistently, this approach fosters mutual respect and deepens working relationships. He draws attention to micro-moments, small, everyday interactions like a manager's tone in a meeting or a colleague's response to stress, that cumulatively shape a workplace's emotional ecosystem. If these micro-moments are filled with respect, appreciation, and attunement, they build positive emotional capital. If they are dominated by indifference, dismissiveness, or hostility, they corrode trust and connection. In closing, Goleman reiterates that organizations must go beyond technical competence and start prioritizing emotional and relational skills at every level, from hiring and training to leadership development and performance reviews. The future of effective work, he argues, depends on our ability to cultivate emotionally intelligent workplaces, where relationships are seen not as side issues but as the central infrastructure of human collaboration. A healthy workplace is not defined by fancy perks or mission statements, but by the quality of emotional exchanges between its people, by how it feels to be there day after day. Ultimately, Goleman makes the case that social intelligence is not only about being liked or polite, but about building environments where people can thrive emotionally, cognitively, and professionally, because when people feel connected, respected, and emotionally safe, they bring their best selves to their work and everyone benefits. Chapter 10, Toward a Socially Intelligent Society. Daniel Goleman concludes his exploration of social intelligence by expanding the lens from individual relationships and workplace dynamics to the broader societal and global implications of emotional and social capacities, arguing that the well-being of societies, and even the future of the planet, depends on our ability to cultivate empathy, compassion, and relational awareness on a systemic level. He begins by reiterating that human beings are biologically wired for connection, shaped through evolution to thrive in cooperative, emotionally attuned social environments, and that our brains, particularly through limbic resonance and mirror neurons, are designed not just to survive in isolation but to flourish in emotionally rich, supportive networks. Yet, modern society, with its increasing pace, digital isolation, economic pressures, and cultural glorification of competition, individualism, and emotional detachment, often undermines the very neural and social conditions needed for empathetic living. Goleman asserts that social intelligence is not simply a personal virtue or leadership asset but a foundational skill for democracy, justice, education, and global cooperation. He critiques social systems that reward manipulation, status-seeking, and emotional insensitivity, calling for a radical reorientation toward systems that prioritize human connection, emotional literacy, and moral concern. He discusses how social intelligence, or the lack of it, shapes everything from how children are raised and educated, to how citizens interact in communities, to how nations handle conflict and diversity. Goleman advocates for early intervention in education, stressing the importance of embedding emotional and social learning into school curricula from the earliest stages, not as extracurricular programs, but as core educational priorities on par with literacy and math. He presents compelling evidence from research and school programs showing that children who learn to identify emotions, practice empathy, manage conflict, and collaborate constructively are not only more emotionally healthy but also perform better academically and grow into more socially responsible adults. He envisions schools as laboratories of emotional intelligence, where children learn not just facts, but how to be human with one another. Beyond education, Goleman discusses the urgent need to address the emotional climate of public life, where political discourse is increasingly polarized, empathy across difference is rare, and media often amplifies fear, outrage, and division. He suggests that fostering a socially intelligent society requires changing the emotional tone of our public institutions, encouraging dialogue over debate, listening over shouting, and compassion over condemnation. He calls on media creators, community leaders, and policymakers to become architects of emotional culture, shaping narratives and structures that reinforce empathy, connection, and mutual understanding. In a socially intelligent society, Goleman explains, systems would be designed with a deep understanding of human emotional needs. Workplaces would value emotional well-being as much as performance. Healthcare would treat emotional suffering with the same seriousness as physical pain. Urban planning would foster spaces for connection and belonging, and governance would be informed by empathy for the most vulnerable. He explores how emotional isolation and chronic stress, fueled by social disconnection, poverty, inequality, and injustice, undermine not only individual health but also public trust, economic stability, and societal cohesion. Citing public health data, he notes that societies with high inequality, low trust, and weak social bonds suffer from more violence, mental illness, and social breakdown than those with strong emotional infrastructures. Goleman also engages with the challenge of cultivating empathy in an age of digital technology, where virtual communication often lacks the emotional nuance and immediacy of face-to-face interaction. While he acknowledges the connective potential of digital platforms, he warns that screen-based communication can erode empathy, reduce accountability, and foster emotional disengagement. He suggests that a socially intelligent society must teach digital empathy, the ability to be emotionally attuned even in online spaces, and must create technologies and norms that support emotional integrity rather than distraction or aggression. Another key theme Goleman explores is global interdependence. In an interconnected world where economies, climates, and security are linked across borders, he argues that social intelligence must scale beyond local interactions to encompass global empathy, a recognition that the suffering or success of others, even across the world, affects us all. He highlights the need for international cooperation not only in diplomacy or commerce but in cultivating shared emotional understanding, cultural humility, and compassion for distant others. He proposes that building a socially intelligent society on a global level involves investing in cross-cultural education, humanitarian storytelling, and global citizenship that emphasizes emotional solidarity over tribalism or national pride. Goleman also emphasizes the role of moral imagination, the capacity to see the world through the eyes of others and to envision systems that support justice and care, as essential to social progress. He draws inspiration from peace builders, social reformers, and everyday citizens who demonstrate extraordinary empathy and moral courage, arguing that their emotional leadership offers a roadmap for broader social transformation. Throughout the chapter, Goleman returns to the neuroscience of empathy and connection to underscore that social intelligence is not a luxury, but a biological necessity, and that societies ignore this truth at their peril. When empathy is suppressed, whether in a violent neighborhood, a corrupt institution, or a divided nation, human potential contracts and suffering multiplies. Conversely, when empathy is cultivated through compassionate leadership, inclusive policies, and emotionally rich relationships, people thrive, communities heal, and civilizations evolve. Goleman concludes the book by reminding us that while the challenges to creating a socially intelligent society are great, the tools and capacities already exist within us. Evolution has endowed us with the neural equipment to care, to connect, and to collaborate. The task ahead is to design cultures, systems, and institutions that activate and elevate these capacities. Social intelligence, he argues, must become the ethos of the future, a guiding principle not only for individuals seeking richer relationships, but for humanity seeking a more peaceful, just, and sustainable world. It is a call not merely for kindness, but for emotional literacy, relational accountability, and systemic empathy. Goleman ends with a hopeful vision that by recognizing and nurturing our interconnectedness, biologically, emotionally, and socially, we can build a society where compassion is not an exception but the norm, where emotional intelligence is not an afterthought but the foundation of our collective flourishing. Conclusion. In the conclusion of Social Intelligence, Daniel Goleman reflects on the profound implications of social intelligence for both personal well-being and societal transformation. Drawing from the insights developed throughout the book, he reaffirms that human beings are inherently social creatures, biologically wired for connection, emotional attunement, and mutual care. Goleman emphasizes that our brains are not just designed for individual survival, but for cooperative social engagement, and this social wiring is critical for both personal success and the well-being of the broader community. He underscores the idea that emotional and social intelligence, skills such as empathy, emotional regulation, and interpersonal attunement, are not merely soft skills, but foundational to the way we navigate relationships, organizations, and even societies at large. These skills influence everything from our ability to connect with others, to our effectiveness as leaders, to our capacity for collaboration in the workplace, and to the success of our communities and nations. Goleman stresses that emotional intelligence is central to creating healthy relationships, resolving conflicts, fostering trust, and promoting cooperative behavior, all of which are essential for a functioning, thriving society. However, he also points out the disturbing trend of emotional neglect in modern life, where competition, isolation, and technological detachment often undermine our natural capacity for empathy and connection. He calls for a paradigm shift, one that moves beyond focusing solely on cognitive intelligence (IQ) and technical prowess to acknowledging the critical importance of emotional intelligence (EQ) and social intelligence (SI). Goleman advocates for a societal transformation where social intelligence is integrated into all aspects of life, from early childhood education, to workplace culture, to governance and global diplomacy. He calls for schools to prioritize emotional learning alongside academic instruction, ensuring that future generations are equipped with the skills to manage their emotions, understand others' feelings, and engage in positive, productive social interactions. Goleman argues that these social skills, when developed early in life, can have long-lasting effects on individual success, mental health, and overall life satisfaction. He also discusses the role of leadership in fostering social intelligence at a societal level. Leaders, whether in business, politics, or community organizations, have the power to shape the emotional climate of entire groups, influencing everything from group dynamics and collaboration to the moral tone of society. Leaders who are emotionally attuned, empathetic, and emotionally regulated can inspire trust, cooperation, and innovation, while those who are emotionally distant, reactive, or manipulative can create toxic environments that lead to conflict, distrust, and dysfunction. Goleman notes that social intelligence is not just about fostering personal relationships but also about recognizing and addressing the broader emotional dynamics of groups, organizations, and societies. In the context of global challenges, Goleman stresses the importance of cultivating social intelligence on an international scale, where empathy, cooperation, and understanding between cultures and nations are essential for addressing pressing issues like climate change, poverty, and conflict. He believes that the development of social intelligence is key to fostering global peace, sustainability, and collective action, as it encourages people to view each other not as adversaries or competitors, but as interconnected members of a global community. Throughout the conclusion, Goleman calls for a collective effort to build a socially intelligent society, one that values emotional literacy, compassion, and relational wisdom. He advocates for systemic changes in education, workplace dynamics, and public policy that recognize the importance of emotional and social intelligence. This transformation, he argues, requires not only a shift in individual behaviors and attitudes but also a reimagining of institutions and systems that support and nurture these social capacities. He concludes by reiterating the fundamental truth that emotional and social intelligence are not just important for personal growth and success, but essential for the collective well-being of humanity. He envisions a future where social intelligence is not a luxury or an afterthought, but a central pillar of human development and societal progress. Ultimately, Goleman's message is clear. The future of humanity depends not just on our technological advancements or economic prosperity, but on our ability to connect with each other on a deeper, more empathetic level, fostering a society built on trust, cooperation, and mutual care. By prioritizing social intelligence, we have the potential to create healthier, more resilient communities, more effective organizations, and a more compassionate world. Through collective effort and mindful attention to our emotional and social lives, Goleman believes that we can move toward a future where human connection, empathy, and emotional understanding are at the heart of both our individual lives and our shared existence as a global community.